Hello and welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. Today we're going to be doing a whole Treat Your Shelf episode where I talk about all the new books that came out in January and February and whether or not you should treat yourself to them. And at the same time, I'm going to be trying whether I should treat myself to the new vegan Ben & Jerry's. Giving up Ben & Jerry's was going to be something very difficult for me as a vegan, so it's very exciting that they've just introduced all these new flavours and I'm going to try one. And hopefully it'll be just as good. They don't yet have my favourite flavours, so I had to choose chocolate fudge brownie. I'm not really a chocolate ice cream kind of person, but I do like brownies. Okay, let's start with a book while I let that ice cream melt. So the first book on our list that came out right at the beginning of January is 3 Things About Elsie by Joanna Cannon. And no doubt you've heard me rave about this one, you will have heard loads of other booktubers rave about this one as well. It's been getting a ton of hype and all very well deserved. 3 Things About Elsie tells the story of an old woman named Florence who is living in an old person's home, and when we first meet her she has fallen over in her house and she can't get up. Which already is just such a sad situation, so you know from there that this is going to be a book that's going to make you cry. And it's basically told between 2 timelines. One of them is the present day, in which we literally see like the minutes and the hours tick by while she's on the floor of her flat and can't get up. And then the other timeline is back. I don't actually know exactly how far back in time it is. She's still living at the old person's home, and it's her and her best friend Elsie, who she says she has 3 things to tell about, and another friend, Jack, that they make at the old person's home, are going off and investigating this new suspicious person who's arrived at the home they're not sure about. So then we also get this kind of third timeline. We get flashes and memories of Elsie as a child. It's really beautifully written, and it will make you feel really sad about the ways in which we do dismiss and ignore the elderly. And we shouldn't, because that's going to be us one day and we're going to really want people to listen to us. So should you treat yourself to that book? Yes, absolutely. Go and splash your cash on that one. Okay, let's give this ice cream a go. I'm nervous. Please be good. Please be good. It tastes different, but I can't work out what the different taste is, and I like it. Is it maybe a bit nuttier? It's quite fun trying this actually with chocolate ice cream. Seeing as I don't love chocolate ice cream usually, I think I might like this a bit better. It's got some stronger flavour other than just the sweetness of the chocolate, and I quite like that. It's giving it some depth. What's this actually made of? Oh, that's in French. Here we go. Almond. I think it's the almonds that I'm tasting. And malted barley. I mean, I don't know what's usually in ice cream, so I don't know if this stuff is unusual or not. I'm going to have to look that up. Let's try a brownie bit. Oh, the brownie bits feel even gooier and richer. I've had vegan brownies before and I really like them. They do tend to be very rich. Yeah, I will treat myself to that again. Okay, another book that came out at the beginning of January was If I Die Before I Wake by Emily Cock. And I've got a lovely proof copy here with these bright yellow pages and this dramatic tagline, "How do you solve your own murder?" on the front. This is a very unusual book because it's written from the perspective of somebody in a coma. And I have seen that done once before in Sometimes I Lie, but I didn't really fall in love with that book, and also a lot of it was kind of told through flashbacks, whereas this one I thought felt a lot more claustrophobic. In this, you really are inside the head of this man in a coma throughout the whole thing. He has memories and kind of flashbacks that way, but you very much still feel present in his body even while he's remembering those. So the main character is this guy called Alex, who is in a coma after suffering an accident from rock climbing, and nobody knows that he is aware of everything around him. They think that he's totally unconscious, totally unresponsive, but actually he can hear and feel everything that's happening. I mean, that's really just all of our worst nightmares, isn't it? So I wouldn't say that this book was necessarily enjoyable to read because I was feeling so stressed the whole time and so claustrophobic, but it was so well done. I would say that sometimes the fact that we're always trapped from this perspective did make the action a bit slow. It kind of dragged a little bit in the middle and I needed something else to happen, but I guess that's how the main guy felt times a million. The ending I found a little frustrating, even though I do think it was the right way for that book to end. So yeah, overall a really interesting book, and I've been reading a ton of psychological thrillers lately, and this is one that has managed to not be just the same as everything else. So should you treat yourself to this book? That's a yes from me. And I'm going to treat myself to some more of this ice cream. This is a terrible idea because I'm just about to have supper, but It's good, I'm liking it. Another January release that you might have heard a lot of people talking about is Lullaby by Layla Slimani. Or if you're in the States, it's called The Perfect Nanny over there. And that is one of those books that is just seemingly overnight, it's just suddenly everywhere I go. Angelica lent this one to me in December, and I'd never heard of it, and I read it and I thought it was a really unusual and creepy and different kind of thriller. And then suddenly the second I read it, I then saw it everywhere. Typical how that always happens. This one's become pretty famous for its very dramatic opening. The first few lines are, "The baby is dead, it only took a few seconds." So right up, we know exactly how the story is going to end. This is the story of a nanny who murdered the 2 children that she's looking after. And then we go back to the beginning of her being hired and we see everything build up to that point. That is such an unsettling experience because you actually like this nanny and you also get to know the parents of the children. And for a long time while reading, I just couldn't see how it could possibly end that way. It seemed so unlikely and you see exactly why they trust her. And even in bits where she does things that are slightly unusual, you would never in a million years imagine that she would be capable of murdering these 2 children. But as the book goes on, it's not that you ever understand it, but you start to see the pieces fall into place in this really creepy way. Yeah, I can see why it's been getting such a buzz. It's not going to be for everyone, but if you ask me, should you treat yourself to this one, it's going to be a definite yes. I really, really enjoyed it. So that's a 3 out of 3 so far. The next book on my list is The Sacrifice Box by Martin Stewart. That's another one that came out in January. And this one is a comedy horror story about a group of friends who find a box in the woods where you have to each sacrifice something, and the rules are that you can never take back your sacrifice and that you can never go back to the box by yourself or after dark. I can't remember the exact rules, but I think it's that. And of course, these rules get broken and then terrifying things start to happen to these teenagers. So on paper, that sounds really, really fun, and I particularly like that at its core, it's about friendship. But it didn't actually really work for me, and I think that's because it seemed like the author couldn't quite decide if he wanted it to be horror or comedy. And it can absolutely be both, and I wanted it to be both, but it kind of was neither. It wasn't funny enough to be a proper comedy, it just seemed like a slightly absurd horror book, and then it wasn't scary enough because of the absurdity of it. You see what I mean? So I like the idea, and I now really want to read something like what I thought this was going to be, but should you treat yourself to this one, I'm going to have to say no, it wasn't really worth it for me. Another one that's been hugely hyped, you will not have been able to avoid hearing about this one, is The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. And this is a book that when I first saw it existed, I couldn't help but roll my eyes because it seemed like such an exact copy of The Girl on the Train. Everything from the name to the plot, it's about a woman with a drinking problem who watches people out of her window and she witnesses something terrible happening, but then nobody will believe her because she's unreliable. I read all of that blurb and I was like, we've literally had this before, and it was a pretty big deal, that book, so you can't just copy it. Having read it, I did actually really enjoy it, and I thought that it did bring something a bit new. I'm not going to say that it was groundbreaking because it did ultimately feel like just another of those big thrillers. It wasn't anything that blew my mind, but what set it apart a little bit was the style. So it's written in this very nostalgic style with a lot of allusions to Hitchcock movies. The main character is obsessed with Hitchcock movies and she watches them all day, and there's loads of stuff in the plot that kind of mirrors things that happen in these movies. I mean, I haven't really seen any of these movies other than Psycho, but they're so famous I just know about them, so I kind of recognise the allusions. And I thought that set it apart from other thrillers, more so than anything amazing about the plot or the twist or the premise or anything like that. So should you treat yourself to this one? I'm going to say yes, if only because everyone's going to be talking about it this year, so you don't want to miss out on that. And if you're a fan of thrillers, you will enjoy it. It's very engaging and page-turning. You can't really go wrong with it. It just might not be one that you remember in 10 years' time. Okay, one more bite and then this is going back in the freezer. It's also very coconutty. I think that's also the taste I'm getting. Okay, so the last book on my list is a February release, and that is Everything is Lies by Helen Callahan. And this is one of those thrillers that I just couldn't help but pick up because it's got a very enticing blurb about family secrets that are all going to come out, and I can just never resist those because I always really want to know what the secret is. And the secret comes out relatively early on, so I am going to tell you about it because that's the only way I can explain what is interesting about this book. So if you're really, really opposed to spoilers, then skip ahead or just switch off now because this is the last one on the list, but I don't think this is a spoiler that will ruin your experience. This is about a cult. And that is what sucked me in and kept me reading with this one, even though the writing wasn't particularly magnificent and I didn't particularly care about the main character, is because we get a whole load of flashbacks into her mum's time living at this cult. And I found that stuff really creepy and exciting, because cults are just fascinating, aren't they? So that was cool, but aside from that, it was a pretty run-of-the-mill thriller. There was no particularly big shocking moment for me, and there were too many characters that didn't really make sense. Their motivations didn't really make sense. So while I was reading it, I was really into it, and I read the whole thing in like 2 days, and I was reading it while I walked on the street because I didn't want to put it down. I then got to the end and was like, okay, didn't really leave me anything amazing to think about. So the big question, should you treat yourself to Everything Is Lies? I don't know. If you want to lose yourself in something a bit silly and exciting, it will certainly do the trick. But if you're a bit fed up of the masses of slightly generic thrillers that have been coming out recently, this one's not going to do anything amazing to break you out of that rut. So it depends what you're after. Suit yourself. Oh god, I need to stop. So in conclusion, vegan Ben & Jerry's is delicious. There's a lot out there for you to treat yourself to, and I am off to make some actual food. So don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and leave me a comment below letting me know if you have read any of those books, or if there are any other new releases that I need to go back and catch up on. And of course, do hit that subscribe button below for new videos every Friday. See you next time!